evening, everybody. My name is Kevin Johnson. I'm on the board of directors for the Planning and Conservation League, and we are delighted to co-host this program tonight with the Center on Mind-Body Medicine. We're going to have a presentation from Matt Erb, who I'll tell you about in a little bit, which will go about 35 to 40 minutes, and we'll have approximately 20 minutes to take your questions. And I wanted to comment on the origins of this collaborative effort. I was speaking with a good old friend of mine named Greg Dennis a few months ago, and we were talking about all the negative climate news and how it was kind of hard to take. And he mentioned that he was aware of the center being interested in working with the environmental community on climate anxiety and fatigue and even depression. And so we promptly set up a phone call with people there with the center, and we decided we would put together this webinar. And some of you will find it a little bit out of the ordinary in terms of a mainline environmental group delving into these types of issues, but our sense is time is appropriate now with all the challenges that we have ahead of ourselves. I want to put in a couple additional thank yous here. First to Greg for helping put this together, and then also the Thomas and Melissa Jackson family, who were part of the inspiration for moving this forward. Administratively, I wanted to thank Johnny Carlson with the Planning and Conservation League and Randy Mitev with the Center on Mind-Body Medicine. So with that, let me tell you a little bit about Matt. He is a US-based physiotherapist, associate clinical director and communications specialist for the Center for Mind-Body Medicine, Washington, D.C. He's a guest instructor for the University of Arizona Departments of Integrative Medicine, Psychiatry, and Family Medicine. Matt has a clinical practice in Tucson, Arizona, and is founder of Embody Your Mind, focused on writing, teaching, and consulting in areas of mind-body medicine, physiotherapy and medical health, public health, and integrative health models. So with that, Matt, please take it away.
All right, thank you so much, Kevin, and it's good to have all of you joining us tonight, and those that may be watching this recorded. As Kevin said, I work with the Center for Mind-Body Medicine. I have a couple of roles there. I'm an associate clinical director, overseeing our clinical programs where we train professionals around the world in our model of mind-body medicine, and also a communications specialist. I'm coming to you from the Sonoran Desert here in Tucson, Arizona. And as I say that, reflecting on this last year of setting record after record after record of heat, record number of days over 110, record number of days over 100, record number of days where the low didn't drop below 80, and on, and just contemplating that and the relevance of that in our lives. What I'd like to do is, as I jump in here to this presentation, just offer an acknowledgement, a couple of acknowledgements that are very important to me. I'm going to go ahead and put up my slides, so give me just a moment to do that. And go here and here. All right. So hopefully you can see that this is creating a healing-centered community for climate disaster preparedness and response. And these acknowledgements I want to make really tie into the very nature of suffering in our world, the prevalence of present and historical trauma impacting many individuals and communities and populations around the world. I maintain a foremost commitment to contributing to the amelioration of suffering in my work, and I approach my work as much as I'm humanly possible from a stance of humility, sort of a multi-layered humility. If I do or say anything in this presentation that carries ignorance or misunderstanding or impact for you, I welcome your feedback as a chance to learn, heal, and grow together. And I also want to recognize all that's been taken from people of First Nations and all that remains to be healed. As part of that, it's important for me to offer a land acknowledgement and acknowledgement of Indigenous persons and communities. So as I do this, you might just pause for a moment and contemplate and recognize the lands that you're on, The land that I'm sitting on at this moment is the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Tohono O'odham and the Pasquayaki tribes. And I recognize these peoples as the original stewards of this land and all the relatives within it. As you'll hear in just a little bit, I'll tie back to the importance of Indigenous involvement and wisdom in our efforts for climate response. With that said, an overview of our presentation, we're going to be covering some items and themes. I'll just give you a little bit of a sense. I'm going to open by talking briefly about complexity and uncertainty in relationship to the climate crisis. I'll explore the relevance of the concept of self-care and mind-body medicine and expand that self-care actually is community-focused. It's not an individualistic construct. We'll experience foundational mind-body medicine skills. I'm going to throw in 2 short experientials that you can get a sense of the mind-body medicine practices and how they can offset the deleterious effects of stress. We'll frame climate anxiety in relationship to the larger topic of social determinants of health and examine burnout in relationship to climate change, including the key areas that we want to be thinking about to support and address. We'll consider the need for increased individual and community preparedness for climate disaster and overview the Center for Mind-Body Medicine's work in global trauma relief around the world. And if there's time, I'll add in a short overview of the science of stress and trauma. I think that's the visibility of that topic has grown substantially in recent years, but it does inform climate anxiety, grief, depression, and burnout. So with that said, in this first slide, I found this interesting piece of art to frame a quote from Nora Bateson, which says that the problems that we're facing right now are so big that it's not possible to actually know how to fix them. This underscores epistemic humility. I don't think any of us know for sure exactly what to do next, although we all have our day-to-day efforts that aim to address the issue. But this requires some degree of training ourselves in tolerance of uncertainty and recognizing just how complex this really is. And just the other day, I think it was Kevin or Greg sent an article from the New York Times that was up just 2 days ago about the growing rates of suicide in climate workers, climate activists. And one of the quotes from that I'll just also add in here is that anyone involved in this problem feels a very strong sense of frustration, anger, and futility. This was quoting Susan Clayton, who's a professor of psychology at the College of Wooster in Ohio. She went on to say that there's that sense that the stakes are so high and there can be extreme pessimism that we're not doing anything, or if we are doing something, it's not going to be enough. And I think that underscores the challenge that we're facing and the impact that it's having on people's mental health. In the Lancet Journal of Planetary Health, there was a recent paper that explored climate anxiety in children and young people and their beliefs about government responses to climate change. And you'll see here that 59% were extremely worried, 89% moderately worried, and greater than 50% were reporting anxiety, sadness or grief, anger, powerlessness, and helplessness. This is actual data to back up what that quote from the New York Times is referring to. 45% stated that this was adversely affecting their ability to function on a daily basis, complete their work and family lives. And the respondents also rated the governmental responses to climate change negatively and reported greater feelings of betrayal than of feeling any sense of reassurance when governmental responses are put out. Climate and anxiety and distress were also correlated with perceived inadequate governmental response and associated feelings of betrayal. This is really important to recognize just how pervasive this is, and that was in a young population, which at the same time we can look at that from a strength-based lens, that's good, that they're paying attention, they're concerned, and hopefully that can be channeled appropriately into the motivation for upcoming generations to be able to continue addressing this issue. This is also from another study. This was done between Yale and George Mason University, and it just looked at climate change anxiety. There's a second graphic that's almost identical for climate change depression that looked at it by race, ethnicity, gender, and the generation in which people were born. So you can take a look at that to see some of those statistics and how that's distributed. My hope is that we would have a more uniform level of concern across all people over time in terms of the relevance and significance of this. And there's the same data. It's almost identical in terms of looking at it for climate change, depression. And so what I want to do with that is just kind of some background information about why we're here, is to turn a little bit to the topic of the relevance of self-care and how this links into burnout. This is a quote that's often seen floating around the internet from Katie Reed, and it says, "Self-care is giving the world the best of you instead of what's left of you." And I think many people who are very passionate about their work and their efforts and about various topics often end up being depleted, and that's the basis of the burnout that we hope to be able to address so that we can continue effectively addressing this issue together. A core tenet of mind-body medicine, and here's a classic image of the airline attendant demonstrating the oxygen mask and how important it is to put it on first before you help others. And there's a understanding, actually evidence, that if you don't know what you feel, you have a more trouble recognizing and responding to what others are feeling and experiencing. So this is a core tenet of our work at the Center for Mind-Body Medicine, is that the more we embody the practices, the more we experience them, the more we do our own inner work, the more effective we are at supporting others through stress and trauma relief. And the foundations of this come from self-awareness, which is sort of principles of mindfulness, and self-regulation, which is a concept about physiologically shifting gears when we get into hyperactivation or hyperarousal, when our tension is high, when there's strong emotions driving the bus. It sometimes precludes our effectiveness to do the work that we're here to do. So some of this is about moving beyond just the cognitive, intellectual level into embodiment, and that's why I built in a couple of practices. For myself, I like to think of the work that I do as the development and deepening of presence. And so at the end, I'll be putting up two slides just to give you two other frames for understanding the work that the center does. One of those frames from my many years doing this work is consistent with Joan Halifax's work on embodied and an inactive model of compassion. So I'll come back to that, but it's very much about what we do, about the development of presence. To move in that direction, what I'd like to offer is a short experiential, and I've been having a little bit of trouble with this Giphy playing consistently. It kind of pauses and comes on and off, but you can see this is a composite CT scan of a beating heart during a breath cycle, inhale and exhale. It's a powerful movement. And what I'd like to offer us is a short guided mind-body practice that's built around breathing and body awareness. So we'll first start just looking at that and notice what might come to you, what you sense, perhaps in your own body. The mystery of it, the powerful rhythms and cleansing actions that you see there. I like to think of the lungs as airbags, protectors of our heart. And so now that you've had a glimpse at that, if you're comfortable in the space you're in, it may not be appropriate where you're at, but if it is, you might choose to close your eyes as I'm doing. I like to think of closing the eyes as symbolic of this work, turning our attention inward as well as downward to tend to the landscape of the body, to see how our bodies are feeling. Famous meditation teacher Thich Nhat Hanh said, "Come back to your body, it needs you." And it's only in and through this body that we're here able to do this work in the world. So as we approach the body, we might think of it as our oldest friend and steadiest companion, bringing a quality of care and concern and compassion to whatever's happening in it now and across time. You may become aware of places that are sore or tense or tight. You might also notice and contrast places that are neutral, loose, comfortable, or open. Whatever it is you discover, you might consider meeting it with the neutral lens of the camera. No praise, no blame, just a neutral quality, curious, open. And within this field of awareness, as you sort of drop anchor into the present moment, into presence and awareness, noticing the breath from that sensory realm, all of the actions and movements and sensations that associate with the body breathing itself. Breathing is normally unconscious, something we might take for granted, but it's also something we can take conscious control over. So as you're becoming aware, you might choose to soften and smooth out the edges of your breath. You might gradually deepen your breath and lengthen the breath, especially the exhales. It's well known in neuroscience that conscious breathing stimulates the longest nerve in the human body. It's called the vagus nerve. It's a powerful transmission line for part of our autonomic nervous system. As you're breathing in this way, you might begin to think to yourself the word soft as you breathe in and the word belly as you breathe out, to remind the physical body to relax, including the largest surface area muscle in your body, the diaphragm, feeling its action and the way the abdomen and the chest rises as it contracts downward and outward when you breathe in, and the way it all settles back down as you breathe out. If in this moment the words soft and belly aren't working, maybe you'd think soft and body to expand it through the whole of the body, or perhaps choose other words that carry symbolism, importance, and meaning for you. And we'll just do this for a little while longer. I'll pause for a moment and notice what it's like to practice in silence. Soft on the in-breath, belly on the out-breath. And often, even in short pauses, you'll notice how attention goes back to thinking, to the mind. You can let thoughts come, redirect attention back to the body and to the breath. Sometimes over and over in a short practice like this. Breathing in and breathing out. Anchoring yourself, rooting yourself deeper and deeper into the presence that you are. Following a few more breaths and conscious awareness, knowing that even this short duration is renewing, restorative, revitalizing, and refreshing to your nervous system to help you carry forward with the next right thing in your day. And so now at the end of a breath, perhaps at the top of an inhale or the bottom of an exhale, whenever you'd prefer, you can bring attention back to the screen, and we'll continue on with a little more exploration here of this topic. What I'd like to point out here is that part of this is about dual attention. Much of our life takes us out here into the world. And we sometimes lose contact with what's going on in here. And this is a chance to do that. So it's kind of like, what am I feeling? Dual attention, outward demands an environment, and inward, that emotional recognition. And this is the intersection, the development of presence. And for each of us as individuals, this is occurring within, we're living systems within living systems and ecosystems within ecosystems. So practicing these things has an influence in multiple directions with the environments around us, our natural environment, our social environment, our work environment, and so on. And this brings me to quickly point out that the large topic of social determinants of health and public health studies is very important and relevant to climate work, including to burnout in professionals. So the Whitehall studies were done in England over many years, and they demonstrated something that I think is intuitive to all of us, but that the organization of our society and our workplace has a major impact on our health, and that stress is caused by a combination of very high demands placed upon us and low control. Social support at home or at work definitely impacts health in a positive trajectory, and any imbalance between effort and reward harms health. Job or socioeconomic insecurity harms health. Part of the reason I put this up is I think that many of you would be able to recognize the seeds of burnout across many professions, but especially within climate workers, climate activists. So what we want to do then is sort of move into recognizing that this picture of stress and our shared human need to belong, our need for justice, our need for autonomy is embedded within these outer layers of social, interpersonal context, and then this larger sociocultural context, which includes our environment. And when our environment is suffering, then we're suffering as well. So this brings us into this topic of addressing burnout in climate workers. As Kevin mentioned in the introduction, repeated distressing news. Scarce a day goes by when something new lands that's not reflecting the level of strain and stress on our environment and in this world, and how those things are intersectional. There's a great deal of attention being given to climate grief and the other spectrum of mental health challenges that are tied to it. There's many frustrations tied to the politics of the world, capitalism, working with systems and bureaucracies, which are living systems of their own and often very difficult to see change happening within. The World Health Organization defines burnout as resulting from chronic workplace stress that's not been successfully managed. But that definition feels a little off to me, in that it somehow unconsciously might imply I'm not managing my stress well enough, that this is a personal moral failing. And what I want to do is go back to one of the early definitions of burnout from Maslow and Leiter. It says it's the index of the dislocation between what people are and what they have to do. It represents an erosion in values, dignity, spirit, and will, an actual erosion of the human soul. It's a malady that spreads gradually and continuously over time, putting people into a downward spiral from which it can be hard to recover. So we really want to begin to, and we look at this definition, burnouts, again, defined somewhat as an individual problem, but we're moving it to an ecological systems perspective that is influenced by upstream determinants. And those need just as much attention, even as we're doing our best to address our own self-care within that reality, within that paradigm. So as we go from that, I'll put this up, and this was a survey that was done, responses to climate-related questions specific to burnout. And you can see here these two examples. My work feels overwhelming compared to my ability to change the outcome. of the climate crisis. And my work in the environment and climate change is challenging because I'm trying to do the impossible. And very high percentages have felt that way at different times, either from often, some always, some often, and others sometimes. So what this then points to is, what are the solutions to this? How do we begin to work with this? And this was some of the takeaways from this. We want to be able to work together to create and promote enhanced support networks, create and utilize custom employee support models for organizations and agencies that are doing this work, that are on the front lines, formalize and incentive green time, train climate distress aware, which is really the trauma-informed movement. Trauma-informed healthcare has spread into trauma-informed workplaces and schools and agencies and government and courts. And this is key of the work that the Center for Mind-Body Medicine does, is training trauma-informed professionals. We also want to notice and address negativity bias and improve outlets for emotional awareness and expression. I have a long background in acceptance and commitment therapy, and in that model, they talk about the 6 core features that are shared in humans that contribute to our suffering. And one of them is getting hyper-focused on the content, and we lose the bigger picture, the larger landscape of things. And when I teach about the science of stress and trauma, the way I explain it is that the biology of stress response has translated upstream psychologically into negativity bias. We focus on what's wrong, and that's very easy to get lost in that. And so we want to be able to challenge that. And we also want to increase our ability to collaborate. We want to break down silos and proprietary tendencies. When I gave a version of this workshop last week, I mentioned that in my many years of work in healthcare, but also in the nonprofit world, something that's very clear to me is that when resources are restricted or limited, people and organizations naturally tend to become more proprietary. And some of that, of course, can be seen as necessary. And we also want to find new ways to collaborate across nonprofits and philanthropic settings and so on. Some of the other things that this particular study talked about is compassion fatigue, which is another way of stating burnout, and breaking down these factions that get set up of highly emotionally charged or reified opinions and factions that are, there's no way to come into a middle space when we're in that sort of state of stress and tension, and we're operating from that faction type approach. My own guiding intentions for addressing climate anxiety, well, it starts with that reminder that self-care is important. We know that we do play a role. Personal responsibility does play a role in our health and well-being, but it's not just a self-construct. When I've had a long background in yoga, and one of my favorite sayings is that when we're serving ourselves, we're serving all others. And when we're serving others, we're serving ourselves. And it reminds us of interdependence, and that our self-care is not just an inside job. There's outside factors. We need outside support. We need healthy relationships and teams to do this together. We also want to develop a deepened understanding of our current relationships with and to our work and to the state of the world. When we have a clearer picture of that, it makes it easier to decide and course correct how we best want to relate and respond to the reality that we're facing. And part of this is that present moment presence. Be where we are and deepen in awareness. I call part of it embodied action. That's embodied acceptance that informs how we actually take action, that acceptance is not a brand of passivity. And that doing this type of inner work impacts our outer relationships to whatever, X, Y, or Z, this topic, this situation, this person. And we also want to take small steps. These ladders show if we're doing this, we're not going to get anywhere. But what's the next right step in my day, in my week, and my month? And are my actions aligned with my values and my sense of purpose and meaning? And here's where I want to come back and honor and embrace Indigenous wisdom, elders, leaders, and teachers. I am Celtic in origin, but I've spent the last 25 years immersed with much gratitude in Indigenous tribal communities, particularly the Oglala Sioux from Pine Ridge, and more recently, the tribal peoples here in Arizona, and also Ojibwe in Minnesota. And I think it's vital that organizations doing this work, not just because of JEDI, the need for justice, equity, diversity, and belonging, but also to actually guide the direction that this work takes. That brings me to this next slide, which is how we often find ourselves putting out fires, quite literally, as with the work that we've done in California in response to some of the incredibly devastating wildfires there. But I'm speaking about that metaphorically, that we're often responding after the fact, after the disasters landed, and that sometimes can prohibit an early response. So part of this initiative that I'm hopeful with Kevin and Greg at 350 and other organizations is to be able to help advance disaster preparedness. The communities actually have networks in place to deploy upon the arrival of a trauma in their community, be it climate or other disaster, a model such as ours that has evidence that it can help reduce the rates of the development of PTSD. It can help improve healing and well-being early on in the problem. So what I say is it's not if, but when that we're going to be facing the impacts of this in our lives. If it hasn't already, Dr. Jim Gordon, the founder of CMBM, says that that's true of trauma. It's not if, but when. And that the current system will never meet our growing mental health needs. One-on-one care is already falling short. And with rates of mental illness rising, we need collectivist and community-based models. We need stepped care models of mental health where multiple people, community leaders, clergy, and so on are equally trained to be able to respond to address this massive burden of psychosocial stress that we're facing. Apologize for that, it went ahead. So basically, this is increasing mind-body literacy. I had the pleasure of working with the Bill and Penny George Foundation in Minnesota for a number of years around a statewide effort to increase mind-body literacy. And we served many nonprofits, helping them be able to implement this type of work within the work that they're already doing, so it becomes a synergy. Funding clearly is a major challenge. We'll talk about several bills that have been proposed in the Senate and House in a minute to try to free up some governmental funding to support this readiness to respond, community preparedness. And as that early study showed you, we need to involve and engage youth. I'll now switch and say just briefly a little bit about what CMBM does. I've already alluded that we do population-wide trauma relief work around the world. It is evidence-based, so not only are the individual tools and skills that are found within our model, each one has their own evidence base, but the model as a whole, where we bring people together into a small group setting to learn and share, heal, and grow together, has its own evidence. And so we emphasize that collectivist, it's self-care at the individual level, but within the form of mutual support. And there's an in-depth exploration of the neuroscience and biology of these topics. And then we have a train the trainer model to create sustainability in communities. I'll come back to the ripple effect in just a minute, this last bullet. These are example areas in which we have been supporting public health. So you can see a number of natural disaster settings, Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans and Harvey in Houston, wildfires in Sonoma and Shasta counties in California, support in Puerto Rico and Haiti, both around hurricane relief and earthquake relief. The wildfire in Maui is a more recent venture that we've been exploring collaboration with the communities there. We also do work around mass violence and gun violence. We have a large-scale program that's still ongoing to this day in Broward that started after the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting. We're currently working in Uvalde, Texas as well. We have a 20-year history in Gaza and Israel, and more recently, teams on the ground in Ukraine. We're also doing work with the Iranian community around the women life freedom movement, and lots of others here. We bring in people, social justice. We have a large-scale Indigenous initiative training Indigenous communities to weave mind-body medicine into their sustainable cultural and spiritual and existing health programs. Our research demonstrates 80% or greater reduction. This is in randomized controlled trials in children, adolescents, and adults who would qualify as having post-traumatic stress disorder from before to after completing a mind-body skills group. 72% of adolescents treated for depression in a primary care setting reported that the mind-body skills groups changed their lives. Decreased symptoms of PTSD, depression, increases in quality of life, mindfulness, empathy, sense of personal accomplishment, and so on. And again, a lot of research on decreased burnout and secondary traumatic stress, anxiety, perceived stress. And this is in healthcare students and professionals. And I imagine if we get the chance to study this in climate workers, we would see very similar data. I hope to have that chance one day. When we work with a community, we often a need arises or presents, and we engage with the community to co-create the program, identify what the needs are, and tailor a project design, implement it, and then create a sustainable leadership team where we can pull out and the local community sustains the work. Up here, we see in relationship to what we're here for is disaster preparedness and community building. And these are the bills that have been introduced, HR 3073 in the House and S 1452 in the Senate. I'm not sure with the chaos that is in the U.S. House and Senate right now what will happen with this. It may take multiple attempts to get that funding through. And we also need increased philanthropic support in this area, so that there's emergent funds to support this early co-creation and early adopters to get their communities prepared for this work. When we train people, I'll quickly say that we have 2 4 to 5 day trainings that teach people the core of our model. We then go on and provide clinical supervision while people deliver the work in their community. They lead small groups and workshops and bring it into their workplace. Some people go on and get certified in our model. Some professionals actually require that, like some healthcare professionals. And then we go into that leadership development and sustainability for long-term efficacy across time within the community. We like to point out that there's a ripple effect. So if even one person comes to our training and takes the work back, their influence is significant, and we don't want to underestimate that. So each trainer is sort of an epicenter, and that ripples out by sharing with family, friends, doing workshops, providing groups, and so on. So the impact can really spread. When we get to, let me take a moment and look at our time. I think what I'm going to do, I have a few slides in here just talking about the neuroscience of stress and trauma. And these are some of the topics like movement and biofeedback and mindful eating and exploring epigenetics and family history through genograms and eco maps and improving avenues for self-expression, personalized spirituality, relaxation response training, guided imagery. These are just a few, meditation. And all of them have a science and are built around the science of stress. That stress has widespread effects on all systems of our body. And if it's not offset with these practices, it contributes, the American Institute of Stress says, to 90% of all health conditions. Stress plays some role in the emergence of the health disorder. So a lot of these tools that we teach act on that autonomic nervous system that I mentioned in our first meditation, the gas pedal and the brake pedal. It's very simplified. It's much more complex than that. But these range from healthy to excessive, and that's the fight, flight, or the freeze type responses. And now there's all other subcategories like fawning and fatigue and so on that can emerge due to trauma and stress. So all of these act on that system, partly through the relaxation response, partly through interpersonal connection. I love this quote by Dr. Stephen Porges, a friend and colleague of mine, that the perception of safety, and I'm going to say the biology of safety when it comes online, determines whether our behavior will be pro-social or defensive, and is the turning point in the development of relationship. So this is that tend and befriend component, which is why we do our work in small groups whenever possible, to get that relational component where people feel heard. What I want to do before we go to questions is give us one more experience. It's pretty brief. We want to do a little movement. Research has shown that there's many ways to discharge tension and stress in our bodies. Some are automatic and unconscious, and some we can actually do consciously. So what I'd like to do is a little activity called shaking, where we physically shake our bodies. And some of you may know that animals, if they escape a threat, they'll often tremble and shake as part of that releasing the adrenaline, burning off the adrenaline. We do this intentionally to break up fixed patterns of tension in our body. So I'm going to take my slides down and I'm going to reshare just the sound for a moment. And I'm going to invite people to stand up. If you're able to do this, if you're not, that's okay. I'm going to raise my thing up so you can see me in a standing position here. And basically what we do is just stand or sit if you'd like, because you can do this sitting. I've even had people do it lying down. I've done this with people in the hospital even. But what I'd like you to do is just notice how your body feels now. It's late in the day for most of us, and you may be noticing some of the tension from your day's work. So take a moment to notice. We do a little pre and post test to see how the activity impacts the state of your body and your nervous system. And then when the music begins, you'll begin to sort of keep your feet planted, but bounce through the knees, soft knees, and begin to shake however you'd like. I'll demonstrate it, but I want to get the music going first. Got a little drumming music here. You can begin to bounce. Let the energy and the vibration and the movement go to wherever you're carrying. For me, it's often my neck and shoulders. We're doing a lot of extra movement. Do this to your own capacity. If you have any restrictions or limitations, honor those. Honor your body. Do what feels good and right to you. Deliberate shaking can break us out of fixed patterns of mental, physical, emotional, energetic habits. Free us up in a variety of ways. We'll just do this for a couple of minutes to introduce you. Some people will do this for 5, 10, 15 minutes at a time. Just a little while longer. Notice how this is acting on and in and through your body. body and your mind. Very unique. And I'm going to stop it and try to become still now after all that energy. Rescan, renotice what this was like. Thoughts, feelings, ideas, judgments. I even say, if you don't like it, that's important because that points to something important too. So we explore whatever arises. And then we'll invite everyone to kind of come back together. I'll have to lower my standing desk here. When we have a little more time, we'll often stop and then put on a second song. One of my favorites is John Batiste, Freedom. Dr. Gordon at CMBM always loves to play Three Little Birds by Bob Marley, but we'll let you choose your own music later after this is over if you still feel like you need a little more music tonight. And I'm just going to put up two last slides, very brief, and we'll gather up the questions. I'm not sure if they've been coming in, but I know Kevin is monitoring that. So let me just put this back up for a moment and say that a natural, I've been trained in many areas, and a natural thing that I see organically arises out of these mind-body skills groups is very consistent with two other models that I've spent a lot of time studying. One of them is called embodied ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. So these are just other ways. If you have different backgrounds, maybe you come from psychology. In the spiritual traditions, I put up Joan Halifax's enactive model of compassion, which is not popping up for some reason here. There it goes. And so they're just consistent with that. We don't necessarily teach these intellectually in our work, but I like people to understand that these models are consistent with what is needed for burnout and what comes out of the work that we do. So with that said, I want to turn it back to Kevin to begin a sharing and discussion section. Feel free to reach out to me after this if you have questions, comments, concerns, or feedback. As I mentioned at the start, it's mderb@cmbm.org. So thank you, and back to you, Kevin.
Matt, thank you very much. I have a question here from Dennis Testerman. He says, please comment on PTSD as a type of climate anxiety distress in frontline workers who are the first responders in the war on the environment.
Okay. So I think where I'll start with that is that the study of PTSD sometimes gets overly boxed based on what's called the DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's the criteria for diagnosing mental health conditions. And there's a massive movement across multiple healthcare professions to recognize trauma as a spectrum. And people are traumatized in a variety of ways, little t traumas and the big T shock traumas. And the impacts of trauma can be cumulative as well across time. And so I just want to give that acknowledgement first. In terms of frontline workers who are the first responders, there's high individual variability in who will develop formal PTSD, but that doesn't, whether the person does or does not necessarily mean the person is not in need of various layers and levels of support to navigate their experience and the impact of what they're witnessing, observing, and being asked to do in response to the disaster. And so I'm not sure if there's a more specific question around in terms of the impact on these individuals who are placed in this position. We do have a number of our faculty who work specifically with frontline workers, fire, police, and so on, paramedics. They have programs specifically to train them for preparedness and readiness in these trauma-informed response skills, not just for the people they're serving, because they're dealing with people who are in the midst of shock, but also for themselves. And that also comes back to practicing these skills to self-regulate my state. Let's say I'm the frontline worker. carries direct impact on the effectiveness of my ability to respond to and care for the person that's in front of me. This is true in the healthcare professionals that would receive people in the emergency room as well. So I hope that helps, but if you're looking for something more specific, maybe drop a second question in and I'm happy to go further.
All right, Matt. So then another question from an attendee, unnamed. Can you say more about building community readiness? Usually we wait for disasters and then try to cope. Who would be involved in creating greater community readiness for climate disasters?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a whole layer of different people and organizations within each community who could come together to create that readiness. So training a cross sector of people, not just from climate focused organizations, but from the healthcare system, from the local nonprofits that serve various communities, from the frontline responders that we would like to see as many of them involved in that preparedness plan as is possible. It's very similar to the even getting governmental officials involved in it. Trauma-informed research is that all systems need to become trauma-informed for an effective public health approach. In terms of that readiness, some of you may know Bob Doppelt. He wrote a book recently on preparedness for climate disaster. He works with the International Transformational Resilience Coalition. And he is one of the sponsors of I think, the bill that went into the House or the Senate or both. So look that up, and he talks about all the strategies that are included. CMBM is mentioned in that work as well. So take a look at that in terms of strategies for that readiness. And we really need to free up funding. Without funding, this is just lip service. If we can't mobilize the resources to actually train people in communities, especially those right now that are highest at risk, because of the nature of their landscape or their particular climate, for the likelihood of a disaster landing. And again, just like my last one, if there's more that you'd like to explore with that, feel free to add to it. I'm happy to go further.
So Matt, let me make a comment at this point regarding this question about building community readiness. The PCL developed a bill, SB 571 last year, that went into the legislature, didn't make it through. And we're bringing it back this year as a second-year bill. It's being authored by Senator Allen. And basically, it requires comprehensive early evacuation plan development with respect to developments in high-risk wildfire areas. That would be high and very high risk wildfire areas. And it requires basically that they start planning something that's going to work and get people out in a timely manner to places of safe haven. This is frankly revolutionary, if you will, in terms of the way California is doing its business, because they often, communities will approve a new development and then evacuation is just sort of an afterthought that really doesn't mean much if they have any planning. So SB 571 is worth a read if you're interested in that kind of thing. And we are looking for support, getting it through the legislature this coming year. So on a positive note, I wanted to let you know about another New York Times article that just came in today. It's by David Gellis, and it's under a daily series called Climate Forward, which is excellent, and I recommend it to everybody who is involved and concerned about climate issues. The title of the article is Joy in Action, and it focuses on a activist author named Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, no relationship. And she has a number of very interesting statements in here, and she recommends a book that she co-edited with Catherine Wilkinson called All We Can Save. And it's a bestseller that highlighted the writings of 60 women working to combat climate change in their own communities. And she's got a book coming out, What If We Get It Right, in terms of addressing the climate crisis and what might be looking for. And lastly, I noted here that Ms. Johnson, delivered a TED Talk on how to find joy in climate action. So there are a couple of interesting things to pursue in terms of helping, work with your attitude and how you're going about your day and your week and your life. So with that, I think we're out of questions. And I wanted to thank Matt for excellent presentation. Always enjoy your dancing. I've seen it twice now. I think it was better this time than what we did last week. So PCL is looking forward to further collaborations with Mind Body Medicine Center. And Matt, thank you very much, and good night, everybody, and Godspeed on this climate work.
Yeah, Kevin, if I could just add one thing, when you mentioned that evacuation plan, I wanted to give an example of how, if you had people on that evacuation team in that community trained and people are being taken to shelters, for example, the ability to even lead a soft belly breathing meditation in that shelter place could have profound effect and influence on what those people are experiencing in terms of being able to potentially fall asleep and so on. So adding in the layers of the number of people that are involved that need to be mobilized is very important. The other thing is, you mentioned joy from this article, and I haven't had a chance to read it. I will. One of our CMBM faculty members, her name is Dr. Tamit Sethi. She's at Swedish Cherry Hill up in Seattle. She has a book called Joy is My Justice. And she's talking about how often we think that when, this doom and gloom, that it suppresses or overrides our joy, but how important it is to maintain contact with our own joy and vitality, because it becomes an impactful form of justice amidst things that are innately seem to be, unjust. So it's an excellent point, and it's that balancing the negativity bias to our strength-based and positive-focused way of working with this reality. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. So I think we're at this point ready to conclude, and glad you got in that additional comment. That was very useful and interesting. And good night, everybody. Thank you very much.